Good afternoon, fellow humans. Dear panelists, can we see your faces? Welcome everyone to our last panel, How to Make News That Does Not Suck. I'm Sipo, the publisher of the Continent newspaper. I'm joined by Sophia, Rhiannon, and then Christine will join us just now. I'll intro them in more detail later. But first, just a recap of this afternoon, we've already had two awesome panels. One was about AI and what we can do, and what we shouldn't do, and then all the ways that we can use it personally to be obsessive people. And then really interesting panel about news creators and how we think about that relationship between us old school newsrooms and news creators. And our focus is going to be on new things. So how do we build new news products that people, as we have in the title, actually really want to use and that they enjoy? So it's meant to be a hopeful session. That's what we're taking out of this. But first, because it is my personality, we need to start with how bad things are. So for the last 2 decades, at the very least, journalism has been dying. We've done a lot of this ourselves. We've made really bad decisions. We put everything online for free. We did whatever the platforms told us to do. And now we are repeating the same mistakes with AI. And to the point of this panel, we really, really struggle to think of new ways of doing journalism and getting it to people and getting it to communities. And you can track this in like the Reuters Institute does this annual surveys, and you can see how people don't like what they do. They don't want to pay for our work, and they won't even fight for us to keep existing. Like there are quite a few countries in the world now where there are referendums happening to get rid of public interest journalism or state broadcasters. So maybe this is rock bottom, which is an opportunity, right? Because rock bottom means you can only go up, and in crisis there is opportunity. So today our discussion is going to look at how you do things differently, how we can empower communities with that journalism, and also pay journalists to do journalism, because that's quite important, as I think most people on this call can agree. Our 3 panelists, 2 so far, are all awesome. And in each of them, they're thinking of different ways to solve the problems of how we get journalism to people. 2 of them have done this course. I might have convinced the 3rd one to do it next year, fingers crossed. They've worked hyperlocal, national, and continental. And they bring perspectives from quite different countries. So all the way from Buenos Aires, from Nairobi, and then Rhiannon is in Glasgow. We're going to chat with them for about 21 minutes, and we want to have half of the session for Q&As. So if you're in the audience, if you're in the room, it's incumbent on you to ask good questions. Like these lovely people who volunteered their time to come and speak to us at the end of a Tuesday, pick their brains. I will begin closest to us in rainy Preston with Rhiannon. And she has one of those sort of LinkedIn titles where there are too many different things for it to flow into one sentence. So she's the founding editor of Greater Govan, which is a magazine, and you can get a print copy of the magazine, that focuses on a community just south of the River Clyde in Glasgow. So it's very focused on a place and a community. They have a partnership with an investigative outlet, which means that they have a space, a physical space where they curate people and bring them together and tell stories. And then with all of her spare time, she is creating a network of newsrooms across Scotland to try and help independent journalism. So many, many hats, and she also has a flu. So thank you for joining us. It's good that you're not on death's door and you're good enough to talk to us. Let's start with the magazine with one question of, I know you did focus groups and talking to the community. When did you know that people wanted this? That people would pay money for a magazine about one place in one city?
Yeah, thank you. It's so nice to be here. Thanks for having me. And I'm glad that I'm not giving you all the flu in the room as well. So yeah, the moment when I kind of realized that there was something in this, the moment that I realized I was going to do it, I think, was one day when I was taking a taxi home from a night out in Glasgow. I was taking a taxi back to my home in Govan Hill. And I told the driver where I was going to Govan Hill, and the driver spent the entire journey shit talking Govan Hill, just talking it down. And I just thought, how was it that it becomes so normalized, this narrative of negativity, it becomes so normalized about a neighborhood that someone who didn't live there, my driver, was perfectly comfortable to tell me how awful it was to live there when it was obvious, that I lived there. He was taking me back to my home. And that was, I think, the moment for me that crystallized, like, what if we had a media that, enabled people to tell their own story? What if rather than having a story told about us by media, by social media, by people that don't live in the area, what if instead we created an opportunity for people to reclaim the narrative, and to be a platform for voices you don't always hear in the media, to make space to kind of bring people together and to take a solutions-focused lens to covering local issues. And so that was the moment when I decided I was going to go ahead and create this magazine. And as you said, I kind of spent a long time before launching it going out and speaking to people. It was 2019, and I went out to bus stops, to cafes, to housing associations, to community groups, and I just chatted to people. What stories would you like to hear about Govan Hill? What is a story you think is missing? What do you want to read about? What do you want to write about? And I spent, a year kind of thinking about this and listening to people before I even kind of came up with the idea. And then the moment when I realized, I guess, that maybe it was viable, I was still kind of testing out whether this was possible. I launched the magazine whilst on my maternity leave during the pandemic, but I launched it with a crowdfunder, and I raised, it was £3,500 in that crowdfunder, and that was what covered the cost of creating, publishing, designing the first issue. And that for me was the kind of testing grounds. If we could get people to pay to this crowdfunder, then surely there must be more people out there that would want to pay to support something like this to keep going. And that was when we kind of made it happen, and it's been growing since then.
What did you promise people in that crowdfunder?
I think, we didn't offer anything in terms of rewards. We promised them a thank you. But I think what people had seen was, before the point of launching the print magazine, I had a whole plan for launching everything that went out the window when we went into the pandemic. So what I did instead was, the day after we went into lockdown, I launched a website, no money, no plan, but saw a need for sharing local news about where to get food deliveries, where to get masks, where to get vaccinations, and also for sharing those good news stories of mutual aid, of people helping each other, to inspire others to go out and do the same. And so through launching that website, based on something that I saw a need for, that I heard a need for, we already had quite a lot of goodwill and following from people in the community who saw the value in that. So when they saw an opportunity to create something more lasting, to create something more meaningful, I think people were ready to back it.
A lot of the conversation we've had as the group who are creating this panel was about the metrics that need to change if we're creating these new kinds of doing journalism. Because your publication is so focused on one area, what is your metric for being accountable to those people?
Yeah, we are very kind of, I'm not going to say anti-metrics, but we skew a lot of the traditional kind of thinking around how to create scale and reach. We're not aiming for scale and reach. We're aiming for making meaningful, impactful change at a local level. So what we're trying to do is make a difference to people who live in Govan Hill. We're trying to enable people to feel more connected, more informed, more able to get involved, more able to use their voice to make a change. So when we think about what matters to us, we think about our impact on kind of three main levels. So at an individual level, so people that are maybe taking part on our community reporter training courses or getting involved in the magazine in some way. At a readership level, people that are reading the magazine, and at a community level. So for example, a recent project that we did, we worked with women who've experienced gambling harms. And when I think about the impact that project made, At an individual level, the women who were involved all reported growing in confidence. Some of them went on and got new jobs. They all created new friendships. It all helped them support then their recovery journey. At a readership level, people said that they read the articles produced by women who'd had experience of gambling harms, and suddenly they felt more informed. They felt better able to start conversations with their friends and loved ones. They felt more aware of the issue and more able to know where to get help. And then at a kind of wider community level, there's loads of great stories of those people who are being involved in the projects now going on to speak at policy forums or being referenced in the council or using their experience of taking part in our workshops to go and influence children's services where some person works. So we don't have a set of metrics like that we're aiming for across the board. We often think of it as quite project specific because we work in a kind of project based way. But when we think about the input we make, we think about those 3 levels.
And is that project focused then your business and funding model? If you focus on a project, you can get money for that one project.
Yeah, so we have project funding is a big part of what we do. In terms of our business model, we create we generate revenue from a few different streams. So we generate money through advertising revenue, kind of traditionally kind of print advertising. We have membership model where people are generally paying voluntarily because they believe in what they do and they want to support us. And then we do get grant funding, and that is often project specific.
Okay, thank you. Let me let you rest your vocal cords off camera. Moving on to Sophia. So Sophia's done her time at all the big media, not all of the, at big UK media companies like Metro and NewsQuest. And in those, her focus was on audience and trying to convince newsrooms to think about the people that we're ostensibly doing this for anyway, which is seems to be a harder job than it should be. And there's some really hard won lessons in that of how companies at that scale think about audience. Like, you have to make money, essentially. Sophia's now left. She take the big step of going and trusting herself and backing herself and working as a fractional newsroom leader, which is helping newsrooms to try and work out how to survive this moment and how to scale. And when we were chatting last week, our conversation went to how do we make medium-sized news organizations? So you have the really big ones, you have small ones, you can have conglomerations of smaller ones, but how do we make mid-sized news organizations? So Sophia, I've created a new news organization. What should I learn from big publishers on how you should think about audience?
Difficult one. I think there's lessons that big publishers could learn from the smaller newsrooms. And just listening to what Rhiannon was saying, I wish some of these legacy publishers would hear how these independent newsrooms are thinking about their audience and connecting with them. And I think what stood out to me, Rhiannon, is that your audience was actually you as well. And I think we're seeing that, you understand it very well because it's you. You're that community. And I think a lot of the outlets that are doing that really well is because they understand that fundamental need and that gap. Now, in terms of audience development in large newsrooms and the role of audience teams, in theory, you are the voice of the audience in the newsroom. So there'll be things like, how can you engage with people, whether it's through comments or different chats, sometimes, trying to find ways to get them in a room. Now, in theory, that has translated into how do you maximize some efficiency, results, and revenue. So I think all of us that went into the area of audience development, we're like, we're going to do this for the people, for the audience, and we're going to make journalism and not exciting, and everyone will want to read it. And because, you only know what you know in hindsight and you learn down the line, a lot of us thought that maybe page views was the metric that was actually showing people, would dictate exactly what people were after and they looked like. And I'm talking about 10 years ago, not necessarily 5 years ago. I think 5 years ago that we've known for a while, and that has adapted. But in terms of what could perhaps the smaller newsrooms learn is, and again, going back to this was discussed in the panel before about the creator economy, and curiously, right, that return of investment is really important. When you're in a large commercial newsroom, you have a lot of overhead, so everything that you do has to create value really quickly, in this case, revenue. And I think the smaller newsrooms, the independent newsrooms, sometimes feel like, because I'm not doing it for the money, then I'm not going to optimize or focus this much on this. But ultimately, you are running a business and you want to be able to feed yourself and your team if you have one. So I think that the learning for the smaller newsrooms is to be a little bit more commercially savvy, and to understand that there are things nowadays in the attention economy that, if you learn how to play them, can actually help you a lot. Just don't become reliant on something that can be quite fickle, and don't lose what you're trying to do for your community. But why would you not get a share of the pie that is going around right now? I think that would be my biggest advice, that I think quite often I have seen in these bands of, you're either doing public service and you're small independent, it kind of feels like you could never do that flashy thing because it feels cringe, or it feels like very different to what you're about. And again, and I think that's where creators are actually, they seem to have figured it out a little bit better, because creators are also building for their own audience that tends to be themselves, and fixing that need that they spotted. But they don't feel weird at all about gaming algorithms, trying to be really engagement and attention grabbing, trying to get the revenue from a revenue share from the platforms or from brand deals. So I really do think that that agility that we see from these completely new people, it's coming because they saw both sides, right? And they're like, okay, there is a way that you can actually do it.
How do you attract those kind of people then into your organization? So if you're a small startup, you're started by a bunch of journalists who think about storytelling.
How do you attract the commercially minded people?
Yes.
Find someone who likes to make money. I mean, that's just what it is. There could be someone in your community that has a history in doing sales, or, has run a different type of business and will have that mindset. I think it's good to partner with people that is not everyone of the same cloth, right? Ultimately, I think find a partner that is just as invested in the public service of it and serving the community and building something better for where they're at. But it doesn't have to be a journalist necessarily. Some journalists are very good at business, of course, but if you're struggling to find one, then branch out. Yeah.
And are you seeing more of that happening? Like, now that you've moved out, are you seeing small new startups thinking this way, or do we still have a long way to go?
I don't. Some of them are, and those are the ones, the traditional news people that have jumped into the creator economy are the things that you're clearly seeing them as being very, very business savvy in that sense. But I think historically, it's possibly, and again, this is in the UK. I'm based in the UK, so I'm used to dealing with journalists in the UK. There's also a certain type of personality, if you've always been a certain way, and a seriousness, and I think they find it hard to try something new. I think also it's very difficult for journalists to try something, and perhaps there's a risk of failure there, and so it makes everyone very guarded to try to innovate. But and I know, in terms of who is doing something interesting, sort of in that space, somewhere in between. In Argentina, there's a massive boom right now of streaming. And what I find incredibly interesting is that they took something that is very online creator type, and they somehow managed to bring what was linear TV into it. So you have about 9 different streaming channels. A lot of them deal with the news that broadcast from 8 a.m. to midnight. And so you have programming that you will expect to see with different people. And the people broadcasting are also people that come from traditional media, that were journalists or were particularly in broadcast TV and now have moved to online, but they also brought some of the younger creators, very, has the comedic timing, and they're added to their panels. And what I think is really interesting from the format is because they replicated linear TV, they managed to get the older ones, the younger ones, and they are diversifying their revenue streams as well. So they have rev shares from the streaming platforms. They have just standard advertising that someone puts placement on their streams. They also have membership models. They do events. They do merchandising. So they're bringing a little bit of that. And lastly, what I would think that also makes them really interesting is that everyone in their channels and their talent, they are fractional themselves. So you may see them appearing in the different channels consistently. And so every one of them also has a little bit of a hustle thing going on. Granted, I think it has to do with the economy, that I think nobody can get paid the full-time jobs there to be on a streaming channel. But it makes the whole dynamic a lot more interesting. And so you keep bringing that variety and growing. So as usual, from hard times, new ways of working arise. Yeah.
This is the fantastic thing about having a room with people from different parts of the world, because we really can learn from each other, and everyone is hustling and experimenting in a very broken economy. Thank you, Sophia. Next, all the way down to the equator, to Christine. Full disclosure, I work with Christine, but I will still ask her questions. Christine has done many, many important journalism things. She is the next editor-in-chief of The Continent newspaper, and she helped create and drive the creation of Baraza Media Lab, which is a public storytelling space in Nairobi. And she's done really cool things around live storytelling, which is a whole thing that we want to experiment with. And The Continent doesn't publish individual stories online. Why not?
Thanks, Sipo. I think the answer to that question has changed over time. When I first encountered The Continent and got interested in its unique model, the answer to that question at the time of the pandemic was that The Continent just publishes where audiences are already spending their time, which is, even if you look at the battery consumption on your phone, typically if you're in a country like mine, WhatsApp is number one, always, because that's where we spend so much time. And so the strategy was simply to publish a PDF that would go directly to where we're already spending time. But I think over time, like I said, the answer has changed. And part of that has to do with how the algorithms have also kind of changed in the past 2-3 years, especially with the advent of AI overviews, which have seen news organizations that depended on referral traffic from Google and the rest. They've seen that traffic crash. And so the reason why we don't publish individual stories on the website is because we don't want to be in that kind of algorithmic noise. And so because The Continent has created a community of very passionate readers who have grown with the paper over the past 6 years, just being able to opt out of that emotional and rich roller coaster that the AI and algorithms create is the reason why we don't publish individual stories on our website. To be able to curate our delivery of stories in a way that is not beholden to the algorithms and the tech overlords. And lastly, the last reason for that is because the continent is curated as a 30-page product with a beautiful cover and with a quiz and a nice picture at the end. It's a package that is designed to be read from beginning to end. It's kind of a slice of life this week. And so when you publish individual stories, you're delivering kind of fragmented news to folks. But with publishing a PDF that has a finite beginning and end, you can take them on a journey. And you're taking them on a journey in something that I call a news moment, where your audience can actually plan to consume the news and finish it and actually have that sense of accomplishment, so that they're not drowning in like a deluge of information overload with half-finished stories with like fragmented things here and there. But you've created a product that they can sit with, start with, and actually finish.
How do you know that? So the metrics behind it.
Well, how we know that is because we ask our audience how they read our newspaper. And we ask them, do you read part of the paper? Are there specific pages you rush to, or do you sit with the newspaper from beginning to end? And a good percentage of them actually say that they sit and read the newspaper from beginning to end every week, which is not something to take for granted in this attention economy and fragmented world that we live in, that people would sit with 30 pages of news, of stories and images, and a quiz. Of course, you have to give people something fun. It's really not something to take for granted that they would dedicate that time to consume, to explore, to learn something new from this product that they receive once a week.
And is it replicable? Like, I'm in a newsroom in Buenos Aires. I want to try something different. Like, how hard would it be?
How hard it would be to create a PDF newspaper? I think the good thing is that we've seen a couple of newspapers emerge on the continent that directly credit the continent as an inspiration. So there's one in Tanzania, there's one in Malawi. I think the biggest factor that is not so loud, but is actually the critical factor, is design. It's design and layout. It's one thing to gather the stories. It's another thing to package them in a beautiful way that people will actually read. I think the factor of news gathering and editing, you could cross that hurdle, but you would have to invest heavily. First of all, in editors who know how to edit short, because if you want people to finish your stories, they have to be quick and easy to read. So a typical news story in our newspaper is just 300 words. That's literally 4 paragraphs, and you will get, the whole gist of what you need to know about this. And then, like I said, first getting editors comfortable with editing short. A lot of editors know how to do long reads, but are not so comfortable with like compressing and being concise without losing vital information, which incidentally is what many people turn to AI for. So as editors, if we could just edit short, then we wouldn't need AI summaries. And then secondly, like I said, layout and design. The continent has invests quite heavily in illustrators, designers, people who can actually put together a PDF product that is enjoyable to read and to look at.
Chris, what I was asking is, I'm an editor, I'm a human being, I don't want to use AI. How do I make a story 300 words?
Well, Sipo, it's not easy. I can tell you that. a lot of times, especially in this day and age, and journalists generally feel that, you know, the internet did something for us, which is give us infinite space. So if you grew up or if you came up in like traditional newspapering, you were very aware of like word limits and word counts because you had a finite space to put your thing together. But once we transitioned to web-based publishing, there was, you know, across the board, this idea that now, you know, there are no limits. So start publishing 3,000 words, 6,000 words, which to me is great. I mean, like I've published a story in the past that was 17,000 words on the internet. And a lot of people who read that story told me that they read it till the end. So it has something to do with like your kind of skill as a writer, but also to edit short, you have to bring back the discipline of newspapering, where you are actually starting with a finite space. And if you are in the internet age, it's really hard for you to actually, you know, feel like that is real. But like I said, the algorithms know that that's actually what people, that's what makes stories readable, is if they are condensed to their elements. And if we just write like that and edit like that from the beginning, then we don't really have a need for AI overviews of a story because, you know, in 4 paragraphs, we've done the thing that AI would have done in the first place.
That fills me with hope. We don't have to have AI doing all the things because we can trust people to have skills. We wanted to leave 15 minutes for questions at the end, so we're going to do that. Thank you to the 3 of you for the first part of this. We will give everyone, if you can, in the chat, add questions if you haven't already. To give you a few seconds to think about it, we have planted a question, and very smoothly, Becca will come and ask.
Yes, I am your plan. I mean, I have a million questions, so I had to kind of whittle it down to about 17. But I'll start with the first one. Something that really struck me in your in all of your sort of discussions there was, you know, the different kinds of people that we need to like make up our future newsrooms. Like Sophia, you were talking about, you know, that commercially minded journalist. You know, Chris, you were talking there about, you know, having people like designers, like those that are like, you know, more visually inclined. What do we think then is the most important role, the person that we need to see in our newsrooms in the next 5 years? I know. I wanted to start big. Do you want to go first, Sophia? Because I'm quite taken by your surprise.
Gosh, it's just that, you know, I would possibly say the audience people were the most important ones that you should have had 10 years ago. I think it's not really about what you call them. That changes all the time. There's different priorities, but I think you really do need people that are able to bring clarity out of all the mayhem that we have around us. So someone that is able to translate all of that into a clear vision and message, and that is not afraid of the risk and failing and learning from that failure and moving on. And that comes from having a vision that you believe in, right? Because if you don't have a vision that you believe in, you're not going to take any risk because you just don't know, you don't feel strongly about which way to go. And then call them whatever you want. They just need to be there.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, we couldn't agree more. I mean, that's been a major focus for us today, is having audience people in the room being the center of it. And also, like, I love that point about those that have clarity of vision and know exactly what they're doing. So that leads me very strongly into Rhiannon, who I feel has a very clear vision of what she's doing. So yes, if I can just put my big overarching question of what's the person that we need to see in our newsrooms, and what skills do they need in the future?
Yeah, for me, I think, I mean, I'm coming from an independent media background and kind of reflecting in those kind of terms. But I think, yeah, I mean, as Sophia said as well, I think entrepreneurialism is a really important asset that we want to bring people into the newsroom with. I think there's loads of great people who can tell great stories, but we need people who can be agile, who can be scrappy, who can see opportunities, and that can translate across the kind of commercial side of things, but also translates obviously into storytelling as well. So for me, that's something I'm really thinking about now as I sort of hire for the next kind of round of people into my team.
Amazing. Yeah, I love that. A little bit of entrepreneurial spirit. I like it. Chris, can I ask the same question to you, please?
Yeah, I think I would go with Sophia's answer on the audience people, but with a modification. I think it would be an audience person whose job is not just to look at a dashboard with metrics, but it's to actually interact in the real world and in, from a human perspective with the audience. So a community person, someone who actually answers the emails that people send your organization, or maybe hosts evening drink at the local pub, or whatever it is that gets your product out of abstraction into people's real world and real lives. It doesn't have to be a big thing like events, but it's just someone who is that link between your journalism product and the people who are your audience, and actually not just creates that link, but maintains it, manages it in a way, doesn't take it for granted that just because people are reading your newspaper, that they are an engaged community. Sometimes some intentionality, some deliberateness needs to get into that. And I think for a very long time, audience insight was kind of limited to fancy things on a dashboard with a million metrics that you could never even keep track of, right?
It's
When
so
the reality
true.
is, when people love your product, you don't need to be tracking 100 KPIs on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that point around community, maintaining the links as well, not taking our audience for granted, that we are going out and opening that dialogue. Thank you so much. What a great answer. I've got a couple of questions in the chat and then I'll go to the room. So we have trust in news, misinformation and disinformation. What role do spaces embedded within communities have to offer to bring back trust in local news? So I might go to Rhiannon first, who's nodding. What have you got an answer to that question? I feel like it's very existential this afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, I think trust is the big question, right? It's what we should all be thinking about, is how you build trust and how you maintain that as well. And for me, when I launched Greater Given Hill, I always had a vision of having a public-facing space that we would operate from. And so when we were able to open the community newsroom back in the end of 22, in collaboration with the Ferret, that question about trust was really kind of forefront to our thinking around that. And what we do with the community newsroom, so we run it as our newsroom, so does the Ferret. We also rent out desks. We have people in there. We have other journalists. We have editors. We have campaigns workers, we have freelancers, we have people working in animation, people working in podcasting, all in the space at the same time. And there's so much great stuff that comes out of just being in a space with other people and bouncing ideas around and finding collaborations. But I think what's really important about our newsroom is that we have an open door policy. So literally anyone can come in off the street at any point and they can talk to us, they can talk to a journalist, they can raise an issue they care about, they can ask about something they don't understand. We can signpost them to where they can find support. We can sit down and have a chat with them. We can help them to feel listened to. And so for me, I think, obviously it's not going to be possible if you're working at a continental level or, working at a national level, but being able to create space for people to come together and for people to have that personal connection is a really important way of us for building trust. And we do that at kind of the open door policy as well, but we also have community conversations, and that's something you're seeing more and more journalism outlets do, is hold in-person events. And I think even if you aren't able to cater to the entirety of your audience when you do them, if you do have the opportunity to bring people into the same room, I think that really cuts through a lot of the noise, a lot of the issues around polarization, a lot of the ways that people can be divided, because once you get into the same room, you start to find things that you share in common instead.
Fantastic. Yeah, getting people in the same room, and very conscious that you're not feeling too poorly, but I do have a follow-up question with that, if you don't mind. So we've got a question from Karen as well, talking about that shift, like obviously you mentioned earlier from like looking at metrics to impact, and it's a lot of what you've sort of just said there, but like how is it that you are measuring impact then?
Yeah, we measure our impact in different ways. We do, like, although I'm not we're not focused on reach and those kind of metrics. We are looking at how many people are reading and sharing and commenting on our story. So that does still matter. But more important for us tends to be the conversations that we have. So when people come into our newsroom and ask us a question about what's going on with this particular local issue, we are then asking, what they think of the magazine and has it helped them and what reflections they have. And so we're always kind of trying to capture these conversations, these moments, these interactions. We also we do a kind of every kind of year or so, we do a big community listening exercise when we go out. We pause publication for a wee bit, and we go out into the community and we chat to people and we ask them, are you getting what you want from the magazine? Is there anything it's helped you with? Is there anything that you think it's not doing that it could do more of? And so we see our kind of impact tracking as a way of also genuinely listening, not just trying to tick off some things on a funding kind of report, but actually using it as a way of noting how well we're doing against what we set out to achieve, and using it as a way to direct our editorial kind of processes and kind of magazines from that as well.
Love that takeaway to actually listening. I think that's something that we've maybe forgotten how to do. Fantastic. Well, I wonder, I'm just looking at the room, if we've got any questions, I'll run over here.
Hello. So I'm drawing from the title of this panel, which is Making News That Doesn't Suck, I think. Lots of news doesn't suck, but I think that one of the things that journalists don't always feel confident doing, or not necessarily very effective at doing, is telling people why the journalism that they're doing is good and why it matters. I think that as an industry, we are bad at doing that. Is there any one thing you think that your teams are doing or that you have seen that is particularly effective and that would be useful to be passed on to other journalists?
I think I partly already answered this in how we think about editing and how we edit our stories short. It's a deliberate approach that is designed to make it easy for people to finish reading a story. And I think giving folks that little micro dopamine hit of actually reading a story to the end is not something to take for granted. The other thing, like I said, we are a newspaper, but kind of designed as a magazine. So we're a newspaper that has an illustrated cover page or a designed cover page. So that cover page is so important in getting folks to actually open the newspaper, because a lot of times the news is not always good. Like, a lot of bad things are happening in the world, and to be genuine and truthful, you have to report the bad along with the good. But for us, we say at least your eyes won't suffer.
I think it's quite interesting that us journalists, we like to think like, oh, people don't know how valuable we are, and we're not doing enough to show them how valuable we are. But I think the question is really, are we being valuable? Like, it's all nice and dandy to say we're so grandiose, we're needed in this world. Yes and no and maybe, and there's a lot that goes into play on why journalism right now may not be having the impact that it should. But I think to that question, what Rhiannon was talking about earlier in terms of, how do you measure that impact and how is the impact shown in the community, is really the news that doesn't suck. And I know, just an example, somewhere in the US, they're called El Tímpano, and they are as well a collective for Latin and Mayan immigrants, and they work in a specific area in the US. And a lot of their focus is on just being in the community and how are they helping them, and like just doing this event. So I think, again, for the longest part also, we felt very weird about becoming activists to an extent, and so we feel really weird when we have to be involved in the community, but also that possibly comes from a history of who has owned the media and why didn't they want to be part of the community and in the journalism. And I think that has flipped and that has changed. So it's not about whether we show people that we're important. I think it really is how do we become important. That should be the framing.
And how could I possibly ask another question after that? I think you've left us with one to ponder this afternoon of, is it what we're doing, is it valuable? So yes, we'll end it there. Thank you so much, guys, for coming in today. A round of applause.